Breakfast with Bob.
Welcome to Breakfast with Bob. My name is Bob Babbitt. We're brought to you by the PTO, the Pro Triathletes Organization, by Amp Human, VeloFix, Normatec, Form Goggles. You can. Our Challenged Athletes Foundation in March, we just sent out 3,921 grants totaling $5.9 million to keep challenged athletes in the game of life through sport. Our next guest, seriously one of my favorite people on the planet. What he has accomplished is amazing. His book, From Iron Bars to Ironman, Mr. John McAvoy, the first time we've ever chatted face-to-face. How you doing, John?
I'm good, thank you. I'm really well. It's lovely speaking to you, Bob, and I actually having a little bit of human contact with you this time instead of just always over a phone and never seeing your face.
It's amazing. So, John, I tell your story all the time. As a kid, you grew up in a family sort of like the Sopranos, right? You came from a family that was all about being people were criminals. Your father-in-law was one of the your stepfather was one of the biggest criminals in England. Talk a little bit about growing up and how your life how you got yourself immersed into that life.
So, like, probably, Bob, I always have to sort of start the sort of tale of my life before I was even born. My biological father passed away before I was actually born. My mum was 8 months pregnant with me. She'd been married to my dad, my biological dad, for 12 months. And one night he went to bed at 38 years old and he didn't wake up. He had a massive heart attack. He had an undiagnosed heart condition. So then when I was brought up and born into the world, I kind of never had a father in my life. And I thought it was quite normal for like my mum and my sister and like sort of 7 aunties to bring me up. I didn't realise it wasn't normal not to have a dad. It was only when I started going to school that children used to start teasing me. And I went home and I asked my mum where my dad was. My mum explained to me my dad died before I was born. And sort of that had a real profound impact on me because then I understood that when I got older, I wasn't going to live forever and life doesn't go on forever. And then that made me very driven. I wanted to achieve something in my life. And then when I was 8 years old, a man came into our lives and it turned out it was my mum's ex-husband. They got married when they were really young, when she was 16 years old. And my sister was actually his stepsister, his daughter, and she was my stepsister. And it transpired that he just got released after serving 16 years in prison for armed robbery. And he basically took me under his wing. When he used to come around our house to take my sister out, he'd take me out. And eventually he stopped taking my sister out, but continued taking me out. And we formed this like relationship, father and son relationship. And I looked up to him as a young man. And he kind of opened me up to this whole world of organised crime. Like, he was one of the most prolific armed robbers in the United Kingdom. Like, he was a multi-millionaire when he was 21 years old. He had 5 acquittals at the Old Bailey, which is our like highest court in the land. And he just exposed me to this whole world of sort of organised crime and all these older men. And they were very affluent. They wasn't academically very clever, but they were very streetwise. And being a young boy, that you're very impressionable, and being in that very exciting, high-octane lifestyle where you're seeing these grown men that have no regard for the law, and it's all about money, and it's all about having nice things. It's very intoxicating, and I kind of just walked further and further down that path. And when I left school, I got completely submerged into that whole lifestyle. And I started sort of committing crime with my stepdad and all of his associates.
So, and you got what, your first gun when you were 16 years old, and first armed robbery, 18 years old?
Yeah. So when I left school, again, coming back to what I said a moment ago, I was very driven. I wanted to achieve something in my life when I was a little boy. I wanted to be successful at something, and I wanted to like leave my sort of my footprint on the earth, that when I realized I wasn't going to live forever. And the more time I spent with these men, I started making the attachment that being successful in life was having lots of money and it was acquiring wealth. That's what I thought success was. I thought by the more money I had, the more successful I was going to be. And when you see, when you're exposed in life, you only know what you know. And if you're exposed to sort of that way of life and you don't really see anything else, and you're seeing these men with all this money and being very affluent, again, it's very intoxicating. And I kind of, when I left school, I was very driven, very goal orientated. And at the beginning, I was helping these older criminals make money. And I realized quite quick that I wasn't sort of going to become rich quick and make money. And my stepdad used to say to me, do I think I was going to be have £1 million when I was 21 years old, like he did when he was 21? So then that ambition, I know it's quite perverse when I say it today, and I feel quite embarrassed to say it, but it was like I went off and I went and bought a firearm when I left school, which again, it tells you how perverse that lifestyle is, that a grown man in his 40s would sell a child a gun. But that's that world, and all he wanted was the £400 off me. And when I bought the firearm, my stepdad found out, and then he got really worried about me committing crime with people my own age. So that was when I sort of got more sucked into hanging out with older men.
And when did you, were you 18 when you ended up going to prison for the first time?
Yeah. I was, obviously the inevitable ends up happening when you engage in that sort of lifestyle. And I ended up getting arrested when I was 18 years old. My stepdad got arrested. A lot of his friends ended up getting arrested. It was like a big sort of big case in London. And I ended up, I was looking at potentially 16 years in prison, and I got a plea bargain 2 days before my trial started. And I ended up getting 5 years in prison. And that was really the catalyst for me to start exercising and training. And obviously I made decisions back then that I never thought would be the fundamental sort of foundation of my life as what it is today. So when I was in prison back then, again, I was 19 at the point where I started exercising. The reason I did was because I was in the segregation unit for a whole calendar year, for 365 days. And I sat in that segregation unit, and it's basically complete isolation. I'm 19 years old, and I made a decision when I went to prison when I was that age that I wasn't going to become institutionalized. And I remember my stepdad always used to say to me and my uncle that to sort of to not become immersed into that system where you become dependent on it, you become completely institutionalized, and stay connected to the real world. So I used to read about current affairs in the newspapers. I used to listen to the radio. And when I was in that cell, and I was locked in that segregation cell, I kept I used to listen to the radio. So I used to keep connected to reality, like the real world, not the world that I was currently living in. And then I started exercising. I'll do these circuits. And at the beginning, I was grossly overweight. I was unfit. I never did any sport as a kid. But when I was locked in that cell, I needed to feel alive. And someone once said to me, when you go to prison, you don't live, you just exist. And I needed to feel like I was a human being. So I started doing these circuits, and I'll do burpees, press ups, step ups, sit ups. And I'd start off doing 10 of each exercise. And as the weeks and months progressed, I end up building it up, and I'll do 1,000 of each exercise. And that would take me about an hour, hour and a half. And my body completely just morphed, and it changed and it adapted. And I wasn't doing it to get a six pack or to train for an Ironman. I was doing it because it made me feel like I was a human being, and I was alive. And I sort of, it was me just regaining a bit of control over my situation, and me controlling my body, and a bit of defiance as well, Bob, like towards the system. Like, even though you put me in this room, you can't stop me from doing this. It's about me regaining a bit of control over my life.
And at that point, it's not like you were doing this and you were in solitary because you were not being a model citizen, right? You were given solitary confinement because you were angry. You were an angry guy going, when I get out, I'm going to be better, and I'm going to be a better criminal than I was the first time. It's not like you were turning a new leaf over.
No, not at all. Like, but so again, like it's sort of, to express it, it's when I went into that situation, I went to prison. I took on everything I'd always been taught in that world that I grew up in. Yeah. So like, it was always about not showing weakness, not breaking. To me, being rehabilitated and changing was weakness, because that's what I was always brought up to believe since I was a little kid, like by the adults, by the males that brought me up. It was always about showing that very masculine alpha male, being strong. When you go to prison, being defiant, not breaking, being difficult. Like my uncle tried to break out of prison in a helicopter, and like people that I come to know through my stepdad's friends tried to break out of prison vans. They was involved in prison riots. So like, they were the sort of men that sort of had a massive impact over my life as a young person. So when I then went to prison myself as like an adult, even though I was still young, I just sort of played out everything that I've basically been apprenticeshiped to do in that world. And that's
Right.
bizarre. So when I went to prison, I wasn't scared of them. I wasn't scared of the system. I hated it. I detested it. And so when I went in there, I started sort of playing out how all these other people played out when they was in prison and what they told me and how to get through that situation. So it was all about being defiant, really, and it's just about being difficult. And it really pains me sometimes, Bob, like today, when I think back on that time in my life and how much hate and bitterness I was carrying around as like such a young person, that I was willing to sort of be in a box for 365 days, like a 12 by 8 foot cell, and no 19-year-old should have that much hatred and venom towards the system or state that they're willing to do that to themselves. But I was sadly in that mind space. And it makes me sad today that I used to carry that much hatred around with me, because I'm just not like that anymore.
No, not at all. And then when you get out, you get caught again. And this time, because of your family history, because you're a repeat offender, I think you were given like a double life sentence.
Yes, that's correct.
A double life sentence.
Yeah, like the second time I got arrested, the game like sort of had completely changed to the first time. So when I got arrested, I was put in a special unit, which I think in America you call them supermaxes.
Yes.
So we've got one in Britain called the HSU, which is a high security unit in Belmarsh Prison, and it's a prison within a prison, and it's the most secure prison installation in Western Europe. No one's ever broken out of it. It was built to hold like the IRA. And when I went on there was basically me, 4 attempted suicide bombers, and Sheikh Abu Hamza that was fighting extradition to America. And I walked onto this tiny unit, and the reason I wasn't a threat to national security, I went on there because the police believed that I had the money, means, and capability to be able to escape from lawful custody.
Right.
So when I went onto that unit, obviously I realised the severity of my situation, and I also understood that they were absolutely going to chuck the book at me. So when I would go to court, there was armed police, there was helicopters to make sure no one would stop the van to break me out. When I go to court, there was like a ring of steel around the court where there was armed police officers, and there's not armed police in Britain, so it's very rare you see this. And when I got sentenced, after being in that unit for 2 years, when I stood up in court, the judge basically said, because of my young age, no matter what sentence he imposed on me that day, I would come out of prison a young man. And he believed the public would always need protecting from me. And he said the only sentence that he could pass in law that would protect the public would be a life sentence for conspiracy to rob. And then he gave me another life sentence for possession of firearms. And even when I walked downstairs, the prison officers that were with me, because I had to be escorted by prison officers, they were a little bit surprised by like the severity of what I got for the offence, because there was no actual offence. It was planning to do it.
Right.
So it was really it was a big punishment. But you know what, Bob? Like if you said to me now, I could go back and not go in that place for that period of time, which in total was 10 years, so it was a decade. I know it sounds mad, and I know lots of people will probably listen to this, but I regret what I'd done going in there, and I deeply regret what I'd done, and I deeply regret my behaviour when I was younger. But I don't regret the 10 years that I stayed in that environment, because it was that environment, I feel, that shaped me to be the person I am today. It gave me, I would say, it opened up my eyes. I was exposed to a lot of characters and people that I would never have otherwise had the been able to interact with, which I found people fascinating, learning about different people, their mindsets. And I think it's put me in good stead for the work that I do today, because it's not that I don't condone with what they did, people that have been there for terrorism and all sorts of offences like that. But you have to understand why someone does something to be able to fix it. Even though you might not agree with what they do, you have to have dialogue with people. Now, before, I wasn't prepared to have dialogue with people. So if I didn't like someone, or I didn't like what they did, I wouldn't interact with them. Well, when I was in prison, when I started having dialogue with people that I didn't really agree with, which like a lot of people that are in there for terrorism, I was fascinated by what gets a human to a point in their lives where they're willing to sort of kill themselves and kill other people. And it fascinated me in the regards of, I didn't agree with them, but I wanted to understand why they thought it was appropriate to do it and stuff. And what I'm saying is the work that I'm doing today, when you're in rooms and you're with politicians and you're with people that might not necessarily be doing what they're doing for the right reasons, but you have to find a bit of middle ground with them, something to understand them, to be able to have a conversation with them, to be able to sort of come to a resolution to help people and sort of change the system a little bit. And I just feel like it's made me a much better, well-rounded individual by the sort of the people that I've been lucky in my life to sort of mix with, where not a lot of other people in society gets to mix with certain sorts of individuals and groups of people.
Exactly. And for you, really, it seems like the big turning point was when your best friend, he's involved with an armed robbery, and in a car chase, he ends up getting killed. And was that the moment where you realized, okay, this life, I've got to get out of this?
Yeah, like, because up until that point, that was in 2009, Bob, and up until that point, I was the most entrenched criminal you would come across. Like, my whole life since I was 8 years old was involved in organised crime. Like, when I was 12 years old, I was already getting taught about not speaking in houses and cars, and not talking about mobile phones, and covering up my mouth when I spoke outside so people couldn't lip read me, and being cautious about the people I surrounded myself with, not having relationships with or not being open with women, because if you get arrested, she could go to court and testify against you and stuff. So my whole mindset from being a young man was completely immersed into organised crime. Like, that is all I knew. I did not know anything different. My reputation, my lifestyle, my friends, most of my family, they were all involved in organised crime. So when my friend died in 2009, and I was sat in that prison cell, when I found out he died, one, I'd never sort of lost anyone that I loved and cared for. So that was one of the most powerful experiences I've ever gone through in my life. Like, I've never physically, I can't remember a time other than that when I've been emotional and cried. And when I found out he died, I was in disbelief. Then I got upset and cried, and I was just, I couldn't believe that he wasn't around anymore, and I couldn't believe his life just ended like that. And then it made me have self-reflection on myself, because I was a very driven little boy that wanted to do something in my life. And I looked at my life at that point, and I was sitting in a cell, and I was literally just pissing my life away down into a drain. And I'm sitting in that room, and I'm thinking to myself, how pathetic it is. Like, I'm losing on an unimaginable scale. Like, my life on earth, like, I could have been my friend and died that night, or died the day I got arrested in that car park, and the police could have shot me dead, and my life's finished, and I would have died in the car park at 22 years old. So then I bizarrely thought, I've got a second chance here. Like, I can turn this round now. I'm lucky I've got a second chance. I was lost. I didn't know what it was I was going to do with my life. I just didn't want the life. I didn't want to be in this cell anymore, and I didn't want to be around the people I was around in prison. I wanted to do something with my life. I just didn't know what that would be. And I don't know now and then if you could say the stars aligned, where sort of I discovered that I was really good at something that I didn't intentionally realise how good I was.
Well, all of a sudden there's a rowing machine, right, at the gym in the prison, and that's a great way to escape. You're on that rowing machine. You could be out in the Mediterranean. You could be anywhere, and all of a sudden you're first row you did 2 hours, did 30,000 meters or something. Your first time out. Did you have any sense that, okay, I'm good at this, or it just felt good, almost like an escape?
Yeah, I never exercised in prison to get fitter.
No.
That was what I wasn't, throughout majority of that prison sentence. I never once sat in my cell thinking, I'm getting fitter, I'm getting a six pack, I'm getting lower body fat, I'm more healthy. It was never about that. It was always about the way it made me feel. And it made me feel better about myself. It made me feel like I was alive. And then when I got on the rowing machine, when I was doing those longer sessions for like 2 hours, 2.5 hours at a time, I'd never experienced that. Like, I experience it now with running. Like, when I run for a long period of time, I get that runner's high.
Yeah.
And suddenly I'm on this rowing machine, ran for 2 hours. And again, I didn't know what it was at the time, but obviously I'm getting these massive hits of endorphins into my brain. And even though you get it when you exercise, I think we all know the people that do Ironman and long distance triathlon, you get to a point when you're doing on these long sessions. I get it sometimes on the bike when I get to 4 or 5 hours. And you feel kind of, it's a bit spiritual, and you start feeling like you're transcending your body, and you just go into this like amazing place. And suddenly I'm experiencing this on this rowing machine, this prison gym. And it was like, I was so focused on those numbers on the screen, and everything just kind of like, I just felt at one with my body. And then people sort of left me alone. Like, prisoners didn't talk to me, prison guards left me alone. And I could have just been literally anywhere in the world doing anything. And I was just in this little zone, this little bubble. And when I did the first sort of, the first 1,000,000 meters, I was rowing 1,000,000 meters a month. So 1,000 kilometers a month. And then when I got to 3,000 kilometers, a prisoner said to me, if you row 5,000 kilometers, that's equivalent to rowing across the Atlantic Ocean in distance. And it was only sort of, again, by complete chance that when I was rowing through the 4th 1,000,000 meters and going into the 5th 1,000,000, into the 5th month, because it was getting me through my prison sentence. Like, I thought, if I keep doing this, this is going to get me to my release date, and it's taking me out of this bubble. It's putting me in my own little bubble, but taking me out of this bubble of prison. And a prison officer walked behind me one day called Darren Davis, and he looked over my shoulder, and he just said, that is really, really quick. And he left me, and he come back a couple of days later, and he gave me all these pieces of paper, and they had all the world and British records on an indoor rowing machine. And he planted a seed in my mind. He just put a seed, and I went back to my cell and I looked at the numbers, and I was like, I can nearly beat some of these records now, like.
Yeah.
And I went back to him and I asked him, and I said, do you reckon it'd be possible if I could try to achieve some? And he went, leave it with me. And he went and asked the governor of the prison.
Yeah. And you broke 8 British records, 3 world records, 48 hours, 263,000 meters. And so when someone like Darren Davis and the warden, they see that you are turning your life around, that all of a sudden you're not an angry guy, you're looks like you could be a good citizen. Still, you've got this prison sentence hanging over you. How did you go from there to them letting you out of prison to go change your life?
So, but when I sat my first parole hearing in 2011, I sat in front. I had to sit in front of a Crown Court judge. It's a very senior judge, because I was sentenced to life.
Right.
And you can't just be let out by like a sort of a standard parole board. And I sat in front of him, and he was in front of me, and then there was a clinical psychologist. There was a lay person, so a member of society that sits on the panel. Then there was my probation officer and another psychologist. And he's asked me a question at the very beginning, and he said, you've been in prison for nearly 8 years. When you get released from prison, what are you going to do? So when I realised I was good at sport in prison, and then I broke those records, when I broke the first record for the marathon, it opened up my eyes to my potential. Darren said to me, you've got a gift, do not waste it. And he went, if you do waste it, it's the biggest travesty I've ever seen in my life as a prison officer if you come back to this place. I become absolutely 100% committed to being an athlete. Like, I visualized it 24/7 in prison. When I woke up in the morning, I just thought about being an athlete. I read every autobiography I could get my hands on with any athlete, sportsman. I started watching the Tour de France when it was on, and on the set. So yeah. I become completely immersed in that mindset. And I visualized it, Bob, and I visualized it. And I say to myself, I don't care how many people think I'm like a dreamer, I am going to achieve this goal. I am good. I know I've got the physical capabilities to become an athlete, and I want to continue it when I get released from prison, and I want that to be my life. And my first parole hearing, I went in there, and as again, I had those 3 world records, 8 British records. I'm the only person in the UK British system ever to have ever done anything like what I've done. The Secretary of State said that I was the greatest success story to ever come out of the UK justice system.
Yeah.
And I sat in front of this man, this judge, and he looked across and he said, "What are you going to do if we release you today?" And I said, "I'm going to become an athlete." And he put the glasses down on the bridge of his nose and he looked at me with a smile and he said, "Your release plan, Mr. McAvoy, is not based in reality." And he went, "I think you're setting yourself up for a big foul." He went, "I don't think you are going to be able to do this. I just don't think you realise how challenging it's going to be when you get released from prison, how long you've been in there and how hard it's going to be for you to adapt to society." And he didn't release me. And I remember I was so deflated, Bob, and I got the letter a couple of days later when they said, "You've been denied parole." But what he did do, he basically transferred me to a semi-open prison, and he said he wanted me to have a plan B. And he wanted me to sort of do personal training qualifications, so it complemented me being an athlete.
Right.
Yes. And that's what I did. Over the next 12 months, I'd done my level 3 personal training qualification. I went back in front of the board the following year. And in 2012, after 8 years incarcerated, I ended up being released back into society.
What was the toughest part coming back out after all that time in prison? Or was there?
Well, it's quite a strange one, Bob, because when I got released on a Friday, and on a Saturday morning I joined a rowing club, high performance rowing club in London. I went down there, and my social circle completely changed overnight. So I go from being in jail to suddenly going to one of the most prestigious rowing clubs in the whole of the United Kingdom that was basically like a feeder system into the GB Olympic rowing squad. It was specific to lightweight rowers. That any man under the weight of 75 kilo, that was the place where you want to go and row. So I joined this rowing club. I got in there because my physiology, my heart and lungs on the rowing machine, I could put out the right numbers that they would accept you being a novice rower. So my whole sort of lifestyle completely changed overnight. So I joined this rowing club. No one knew about my past or anything like that. So I don't think I really struggled that much to adapt back to society, really. But it was the little things, like I'm a very decisive person. But when I'd been in there for so long, when I got out, it was stuff like when I went into clothes shops, I wasn't used to being able to pick whatever colour I wanted to wear. Because they tell you, like, you can only wear certain colours, because you can't wear black because you can look like a prison officer on the cameras. You can't wear red because you look like the fire officer. You can't wear navy blue because you can look like the PE officer. So when I was then able to wear all these different colours, it threw me. And I remember going to a clothes shop with a friend of mine, and he said, like, "What do you want?" And I was looking around and I said, "Well, what do you reckon I should get?" And he said, "Look, you pick, it's up to you." And it was just having choice. And you know, another little thing that I had to stop doing it. Like when I got released, for the first month, I kept eating at the same times. I couldn't get out of the habit of eating my breakfast at sort of 7:30 in the morning, then eating my lunch at 12, and then having dinner at 4:30 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And I had to consciously force myself to stop doing it.
Yeah. So, but did you have to also stay away from family, stay away from the people who got you down that path?
Yeah. So that's a good question. Like most of the people that I was told I couldn't mix with didn't even know I got released from prison. So when I was in jail and I made that decision in 2009, I wanted my life to be different. I realised at that point, Bob, you can't opt in and opt out. Like I had to make a clean break from my old life. So I stopped communicating with people outside of prison. I stopped phoning people up. I stopped writing letters. And it's hard. It was hard because some people were really good friends of mine. And when they wrote me a Christmas card, I didn't respond back. So when I got released in 2012, a lot of them didn't actually know I got out of prison whatsoever. And that was through choice. Like I wanted my life to move on. And I'm a great believer in you have to surround yourself with positive people. And you can't have those people that engage in that lifestyle in your life if you don't want to lead that lifestyle. I couldn't do it. So I completely cut out sort of majority of my friendship group from before I went to prison, and then realistically most of my family when I got released from prison. But you have to do it, and it's hard. And I say this to young people when I talk to them in prison, like it isn't easy. It is challenging. Like you do have to be very clinical if you really want to move forward with your life. You have to look at your social circle and the people you're mixing with, and you have to surround yourself with positive people that want the best for you. And I always say it to young people that are in prison and sort of like juvenile offenders, that you would call them in America. You kind of, if they genuinely loved you and cared for you, they would accept your decision and they'd let you move on. If they don't, you know they haven't really got your best interests at heart.
Exactly. When did you find the sport of triathlon?
So basically, when I got released, I immersed myself into rowing. My dream was to become a professional rower. And again, like physiology, my heart and lungs and the numbers I could sort of put out on the rowing machine, I was there. Like I was virtually there. Like I could generate the same amount of power on a rowing machine over 2K and 5K as what an Olympic lightweight man could. But the issue with that sport is exactly the same as swimming. If you've not really taken it up as a young person to sort of then jump in a pool at 29 years old, like you can get good, but you're never going to get good where you could like go to the Olympics.
Right.
So there's a bit, is really rowing and swimming are exactly the same sport. Yeah. And, but rowing makes it a tiny bit different because you can be tested. They put so much emphasis on land training, and on the land training, I was really good. So that sort of always negated my technical side. But the reality is you're going to start coming up against guys with the same physiology as you, and they can also row. Do you know what I mean? And then eventually you get shown. So I made a really tough decision after trying to row for 5.5 months. When I started understanding how that sport works, and I realised I wasn't going to get to the level that I wanted to get to, I had to make a really tough decision, and it was hard because I made such amazing friends. And when I was in prison, I watched a program on our TV programs over here called Transworld Sport, and it was on Channel 4.
Yep.
And I saw this sport called Ironman, and it was on my radar. Like I knew what it was when I was in prison. I heard of it. But then when I was watching this TV program in my prison cell and watching these athletes in Kona and watching men and women get off a bike after riding 112 miles and running like sub 3-hour marathons, like even though I'd never done it, I could sort of, I started understanding enough about endurance sport to realise how impressive it was. So it was always in my mind. And when I realised I couldn't get to the goal and reach the goal I went to in rowing, I went on Google and I thought, right, I'm going to do an Ironman. And then obviously, because I got 2 life sentences, I had travel restrictions, so I couldn't leave Britain. I was trapped basically to Britain. I couldn't race in Europe. I couldn't go anywhere. So I Googled Ironman races in the UK, and literally Ironman UK was 6 weeks away. And I thought, right, I clicked on Ironman UK's website and I went to enter, and it was 4 up, so there was no space. And then at the bottom of the tab, there was like, if you want to race for charity, and I clicked on that and you could still get a charity spot. So I ended up entering Ironman UK 6 weeks out on a charity spot. And I was very fit for rowing. So I was aerobically like probably the best shape I'd been in, like on a rowing machine, rowing on the water. But obviously I wasn't triathlon fit. I couldn't swim. and again, like, because sometimes people think I make this stuff up, but if you look at the dates, I got released at the end of 2012. And then I was racing Ironman UK in July. And in between that, I was rowing basically on the Thames every day. So then I ended up buying a wetsuit. I rented a wetsuit. Sorry, I've got a wetsuit. I was loaning one, renting it. I went on eBay and I bought a bike that was far too big for me. And then when I turned up at Ironman UK, and I got to the start line of Ironman UK, and I just remember, Bob, it was an amazing feeling. I just remember like running down that red carpet at the end of the race. And again, I'm not really an emotional person, but I just remember feeling so proud that I watched that program on Channel 4 in prison. And then I got out, and 7 months later, 6.5 months later, I'm on the start line of an Ironman, and I've just completed my first ever Ironman after being out of prison for like 6.5 months. And that is where I picked the bug up, and I thought, I love it. This is what I'm going to do in my life. I love it.
And so you've done how many Ironman races now? What's your best?
9-10.
9-10. That's sweet.
9-10. Yeah, 9-10. I had the last 18 months have been a bit challenging because I picked up a bit of an injury with my foot.
Yeah, your ankle, right? Your ankle.
That's it. My left foot was absolutely trashed, and I saw every man and his dog. I saw foot specialists, surgeons, everything. And I ended up getting it fixed. And ironically, Bob, I would say so I've not missed a run session now since September of last year. So I've been consistent. And obviously, I'm thinking I'm flying. Like I got to January, I was in the best run shape I've been in for January. My swimming was coming on. Because obviously, like I've always played catch up. Like my bike, what's always let me down on the bike was always, I could always generate the power in training, like on a static watt bike. But it it was having that cycle craft. I could never get the numbers or the moving speed that equated to the numbers that I could put out in training on a static bike. And obviously your bike craft, so I thought, well, I'm going to focus riding more outside. I'm going to stay away from the turbo, the watt bike, get more out on the road, get more. So anyway, this year, or when I started training at the end of last year, when I got to January time, I was absolutely flying. Then February come, and I had all this whole sort of like races all across Europe, and then the virus come, and then obviously everything just got turned upside down overnight. But hopefully, Ironman Hamburg looks like it's going to happen in September. Yeah, it's been postponed to September. So I'm hoping. Well, it's basically going to be the last chance saloon. So all my racing all year is just going to basically come down to that one race in Germany in September.
So where can you travel now? I mean, if you qualified for Kona, could you go there or not? I mean, is that still something you can't do because of
No, yeah. So basically, on my end in Britain, I am now. So last year in March, the Secretary of State removed my life sentence conditions. So I've still got the life sentences, but the conditions have been removed. So I've got freedom to travel. I can live where I want anymore. I don't have to have that approved. Where I can go across Europe, not an issue. Any country I don't need a visa, I'm sort of good to go. Okay. I think America will probably be my biggest hurdle to gain entry, because if I apply for a visa and I get refused entry, I can't then reapply for 5 years. But it's very unlikely I would be able to come in once I've been rejected once.
Right. Yeah. You got to avoid that. When you, with Darren Davis, have you guys stayed in touch, and do you go, because here's a guy who believed in you before you believed in yourself, right? Yeah. What, do you guys stay in touch? Do you work together to help that next John McAvoy who's in prison and doesn't really know what his future is?
So me and Darren we're basically in weekly contact. He's never missed any of my races. He comes to all my races.
Wow.
He comes when he's in London. He comes and stays at my house. His family. I've met his daughter, his son, his wife. He's a trustee on my foundation now. He comes to events with me because he lives basically up north in a place called Nottingham, and I'm in London at the moment. But he's coming out to the French Alps with me next month on my training camp. He's going to spend a week with us. I've formed a tremendously powerful relationship with that man, and like the other day we did a joint conference together, like online on Zoom, where me and him got to speak to 80 new prison officers, and telling them about, like, they're not just a guard that holds a set of keys, like they've got the keys to change people's lives. Like they can also find and change people, like with what Darren did in my life. Like everyone, they are capable of doing that. And it's very powerful, like me and him coming together to sort of do a joint presentation to talk from both perspectives, but to also try to create that fundamental change within the criminal justice system by the person, by the people going into those jobs, thinking actually I'm a valued member of a workforce by society. And I'm not just a guard, but I have the potential to turn and change people's lives around. Because I always say, Bob, I'm no different to anyone else. Like, and I was trying to explain this to these guys the other day that were starting off their careers working in the prison system. When I was in jail in this country, we held 90,000 prisoners in prison. There were 28 of us out of the 90,000 that were deemed to be basically so dangerous that we could not be kept in the prison system with everyone else. We had to be put in these like bunkers, supermax bunkers. And if I managed to do what I've done in my life in that situation, anyone could turn their lives around. And you can't give up on people. You cannot give up on people. And lots of people, I said it to them, lots of people will let you down, but you only need to change one person's life and you've won. That is all you need to do. One person's life. Even though 10 might let you down, you might change one. And that's what's important.
So has there been a couple where that you have been involved since you've been out for a while now, where some prisoner has turned their life around because of your story or because of a relationship there, and now you see them achieving as well?
Mate, I can't tell you right, how humbling it is sometimes. Like, I don't realize, because I'm just me. Like
Right.
I'm just who I am. The other day, a prison officer that was sitting on a parole board hearing up north at one of the jails for young offenders, he basically got in contact with me to say that this young man had read my book in prison, and it had such a profound impact on his life. Like, even when he was on his parole hearing, he was referencing my book, that it had that impact on his life, that it made him see his own sort of true potential and what he could do. And like, when I go back into prisons and I do park run. Do you know park run?
Yeah, I do. Chrissy
Yeah,
Wellington. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. So I always do one of the big park runs in the Young Offenders Institution in Feltham, and when I go in there and run with these young people, obviously they're kind of aware of who I am now. So like, the prison officers tell them, and you go in and I'm able to run alongside them and encourage them and give them advice, and it just sometimes it's so humbling to see that I don't like to, because it sounds big-headed, but I am giving them hope that it isn't the end, and I'm there, and everything I've done with my life, I make it relatable to them in the regards of, like, you are no different to me. Like, I was in this place with you when I was a kid. Like, I went to some of the worst prisons in this country as one of the most high security prisoners in this country, and I managed to do this for my life. Like, you can turn your life around, you can do something else. And it is very humbling, mate, when you see and hear these stories and you have these interactions with people, and you know that you can change people's lives, and again, it's completely changed my life and the way what I perceive what life's about. Because when I got out of prison, Bob, like, it was all about being a good athlete, and it was all about records and medals and being really fast at Ironman, and what I've come to realise, mate, it really doesn't mean much at the end of the day. They're bits of paper, they're numbers on a computer screen. Like, it's about your interaction with humans. And like, when I'm dead and I'm not here anymore, my legacy won't be how quick I could run a marathon and an Ironman. It will be if I've stopped one kid from going to prison, or one kid turning his life around, or if I've helped a family and that's then allowed them to sort of lead a better life. Like, my legacy will live on forever, because their lives will be better, and their kids' lives will be better, and their kids' lives will be better. And that's what I come to realise, mate. And that's took me 37 years of my life to realise that. But I'm so glad that I've had that awakening, and I've prioritised. Well, I've seen actually in life what I deem, what I think is important, and it's about helping other people and service to others.
So, are we talking a movie from this book? What's happening next?
Yeah, like obviously, Bob, like, there's been a lot of interest, and I've had sort of some big studios in America contact me, and over the last few years, and but it has to be done in the right way. Like, I'm very protective about the work that I do today, and what I don't want anything to be, because you could tell my life in 100 different ways depending on who got the rights to tell it.
That's true.
And it isn't about the money. It isn't about the money. And I made the promise to myself in prison, money would never be my God ever again. And I never make any decisions based on that fact. So I don't care how much money someone offers me for the rights to it. If it isn't the right people wanting to make it in the right way, I see the film as a vehicle to help me get a message out. I don't want the film to be about glamorizing crime, because I understand when I was a young person, when I watched those films, the impact they had over my life. And I want it to be made in the right way. And I want to make sure that the film is a vehicle for me to be able to increase my voice and platform in society, where I can then sort of help influence the debate in this country about criminal justice reform, and using it as like an ad campaign to what's possible. And that's why if a film does happen, like I said, there's been interest by different people in Britain and America. If it does happen and it's the right people, I'll do it. But if it isn't the right people and it's not the right situation, I just won't do it. But yeah, we just have to see, mate.
I love it. What a treat it's been, John, just to get to chat with you and see you at the same time.
Yeah, you too, mate.
It's really, really fun. I may have to look at coming to Hamburg. That would be, if that race happens, that would be fun to come over, if they allow us Americans to come over to Germany.
Do it, man. Do it. It'd be lovely seeing you.
You were the first person I thought of when I heard this whole shelter in place I'm like, oh, we have to shelter in place. We have to stay at our house. I'm like, right now, John McAvoy is going, it's not a cell. You're sheltering. You're sheltering and ordering food in, right? Sheltering in place is when you're sitting in a cell and you have no chance of ever seeing the light of day again. And what you've accomplished, what you've overcome, is really amazing, John. I appreciate you taking so much time. And it'll be great to actually see you in person.
Yes.
At one of your races.
Yes.
We will
Please,
make that happen.
If you can come to Hamburg, it'll be absolutely amazing to see you.
It'll be fun. It'll be fun.
Yeah.
John McAvoy has been our guest again. We're brought to you by the Pro Triathletes Organization, by Amp Human, VeloFix, Normatec, Form Goggles, UCAN, our Challenged Athletes Foundation. Thank you, Johnny. Such a pleasure to chat with you, man.
Take care, man.
Bye, bud.
Bye, mate. Take care of yourself, yeah?
Absolutely.